12:03. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Just to introduce the webinar today, thanks everyone for attending. We're going to be talking about how do you go from insight to impact. You may have figured out what your problems are, but you're trying to figure out what to do about it. How do you actually go from DORA metrics to changing your organization? We'll start with some quick introductions and then dive in from there. We'll leave about 5 minutes at the end for questions. So I'm Ganesh. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO at Cortex. I started Cortex almost exactly 6 years ago now. We are a developer portal helping you go from data to insight to action. I was a software engineer working in the fintech space before, so all the fun of trying to ship fast, but operating within a well-regulated industry. So lots of lessons learned from that, and a lot of those came with me to Cortex. So excited to chat today about everything that I've learned, both as an engineering leader, as well as from working with all of our customers, and bring some of the insight that we have with Nathen as well. Nathen, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ganesh. Hi, everyone. I'm Nathen Harvey. I lead up the DORA program here within Google Cloud. And if you were on just before we officially got started, you heard a little bit of my history there. But my role in leading DORA is really to go out and build a community around DORA, work together with our researchers to get better insights, help through the publishing process. I help author all of the reports that we put out. But the most important part of my work, at least as I view it, is that I get to help teams take the ideas and findings from the research and put them into practice. I think this is the thing that is most important, contextualizing the research, putting it into practice.
Super important. I really honored to have you on the podcast, on the webinar today. I think you obviously have worked with a lot of different organizations around the world and have a lot of learning. So excited to dive into that a bit further. Before we jump in, I just wanted to let the attendees know we will be monitoring the Q&A section as well. So if you want to drop questions in while we go, folks from our team will be happy to answer. Or if there's questions left, we'll make sure to touch on those as we go along as well. But feel free to drop those questions in the Q&A. All right. So quickly, just covering the agenda. We will, as you would expect, start with an overview of what the DORA metrics are, talking a little bit about how to think about them, why the system and application view is better than a people view, especially knowing that a lot of organizations start off with the people view. From there, what we want to really talk about today, how do you actually use your DORA metrics, introducing the idea of capabilities. I'm sure everyone in 2025 is wondering, how does AI impact your DORA metrics? It wouldn't be a webinar in 2025 if we didn't touch on that. And then we'll talk about how an IDP fits into all of that as well. So that is the agenda that we have today. So I'll be passing it over to Nathen to introduce the DORA metrics.
Yeah, so let's talk about the DORA metrics. I mentioned earlier that DORA is a research program. This research program has been running for well over a decade now. And a lot of people know DORA for these 4 key metrics, what I call the software delivery performance metrics. The reality is that DORA is much more than just these 4 key metrics. But as I said, a lot of people have come to know and love DORA because of these 4 metrics. So let's start there. And really, these metrics are an understanding of how do we measure software delivery performance? And maybe even before we talk about why to measure it, why does it even matter? The research has shown us over the years that as teams improve their ability to ship software, that drives really important outcomes that all of us care about. Outcomes like better organizational performance and better well-being for the people on our team. We want both of those, right? We want our businesses to be successful. We want our customers to be happy. And as engineers and practitioners, we want to have high job satisfaction, low rates of burnout. We want to feel like we're doing valuable work. Software delivery performance is actually predictive of all of those outcomes. So how do we measure software delivery performance? Well, we start with 2 high-level factors. First, throughput. How quickly are you able to move change through your system? And then the second is stability, because we want to make sure that when we ship a change to production, things work the way we expect them to. So for throughput, we have 2 metrics. These basically ask or answer the question, how long does it take for code or configuration or whatever sort of changes you're making to go from the developer's workstation all the way through to production? And then the second is deployment frequency. So how frequently are you pushing changes into production? On the stability side, we have the change fail rate. This is a measure of how many of those deployments go poorly. I actually call this the O expletive rate because, Ganesh, I'm sure you've had this happen before. You press the deploy button and you or someone around you shouts out an expletive, that's a change failure. What does that mean? It means we need to intervene immediately. We need to get in and roll back that change or push forward a hot fix, something like that. And unfortunately, we live in the real world. Well, wait, maybe that's not unfortunate. It's just a reality. We live in the real world. So these change failures are going to happen. So our fourth metric for stability is looking at the failed deployment recovery time. And this is really asking of our system, how long does it take to get back to a working state? And where I use the word system there, I really mean the entire socio-technical system, right? It's you and me and the machines that we're working with. Now, the really interesting things about these four metrics, first, you can use these metrics to measure the delivery performance, the software delivery performance of any application or service. It doesn't really matter what its architecture is, where it's deployed, or anything like that. You can understand software delivery performance for a mainframe, for example. Ganesh, I bet Cortex doesn't have any mainframes running around, do you?
We don't, but I think our customers do.
Your customers do. There you go. But you can also use this, obviously it's not just for the mainframe, the mobile applications that you're deploying, the web-based applications, even the APIs, and frankly, even the platform, the IDP that you're running, it's software that you're delivering. You could use these metrics to measure the performance of those as well. The reality is, though, you shouldn't use these metrics to compare one application to the next. That mainframe works in a very different context, has a very different set of business priorities and user priorities than, say, your front-end website. So comparing these metrics across applications is probably a thing you want to avoid. The final thing I'll say about these metrics that's really important to remember. Historically, we think of throughput and stability as kind of trade-offs of one another. Either we can move fast and break things, or we can go a little bit slower and have this stability in mind. Well, what DORA has shown us over the decade plus of research is that throughput and stability tend to move together. In other words, the teams that have the highest levels of throughput also have the highest levels of stability. And unfortunately, the opposite is true. If you're moving very slowly, you're likely to have higher levels of instability. How can that be? Well, just think about this. If you deploy software to production only twice a year, heck, if you do anything only twice a year, you're probably not very good at that thing. And so if you deploy twice a year, I can virtually guarantee that at least one of those deployments is going to require a rollback or a hot fix. So right there, you've got a 50% change fail rate. The teams that have learned the most when looking at these metrics and when practicing sort of modern software delivery know that the best way to improve these is to ship smaller changes and minimize the amount of work that you have in process. So it's really important to understand that with these four metrics, we can get a good sense of how software delivery performance is going. Turns out that's not the only thing that we care about.
I think
It
the
is
interesting thing,
important. Sorry.
it is very important. No, you said move back, move fast and break things. I like to think about the DORA metrics as the move fast and don't break things set of metrics.
Exactly.
Because like you said, those two things go hand in hand. And I think, especially for the attendees, we can intuit some of that, right? It's like when you have systems that are well tested and, you can run tests very easily locally, you can run them in CI, you have confidence in what you're doing, you're more likely to push those out because you're not worried that something's going to break. And so all those things kind of tie into each other really well. So I think a lot of us kind of intuitively as engineers feel that, we understand that, but I think what this does is really break those out into four things that we can look at and say, do these four metrics indicate those processes and systems and practices that we really care about
That's
to
right.
move fast and not break things?
Absolutely.
And I think it's really important to touch on, like, what is the point? Like, why do we even care about measuring these things? Why do we care about throughput and stability? Why do we care about organizational performance? It really comes down to our ability to deliver great outcomes, right? Like, what do our customers care about? At the end of the day, that's what we're in the business of, right? We're not writing code for the sake of writing code. We're writing code to deliver value to our customers, whether it's a B2B SaaS application, whether it's a consumer app, you're trying to deliver some sort of experience to your end users, your end customers. And so these keys help indicate our ability to do that well. Like, can we ship features quickly? Can we get those through the system? Can we make sure that the systems don't go down? Are our customers able to actually consume the value that we're producing in a reliable way? And again, we can kind of intuit that, right? The more frequently we can ship, the faster we recover from incidents, the fewer failures they are, the happier customers are, the more agile a business you are. And so those four keys really indicate our ability to build a great business, deliver great business outcomes. That's why we care about it at the end of the day, is not for the sake of just measuring those things. It's because it helps us understand, are we reliably delivering value to our customers? And that's, I think, a really important mindset that all engineers should have as well. So that being said, well, now if they are indicators of our ability to deliver great outcomes, should we use them as goals? And the answer, I think, very clearly is no. They are indicators, not targets. And a lot of us think about this a lot. Like if you treat a metric as a goal, people will naturally gamify it. You do unnatural things to get those metrics up. Sometimes it's a good thing, but in most cases, it's a bad thing. We think about like test coverage as an example. If you hold people accountable to test coverage, you might end up with a ton of tests that do poor mocks or whatever, and that leads to higher test coverage. But does that actually tell you anything? In some cases, yes, better test coverage generally means more coverage, leads to better outcomes, but not always. And you don't want to gamify those things. So chasing metrics means that you lose sight of the outcomes, at least to bad incentives. Then instead, what are they used for? They're used to diagnose system bottlenecks. Can I look at those metrics and say, okay, what is the underlying set of processes or systems that are leading to these bad outcomes? Like, okay, we're not deploying fast enough. That itself is not meaningful. I can't go to a team and say, you got to deploy 3 times faster now. It's like, okay, well, what do I do about that? And instead, what you can do is you can take that metric and say, okay, where in the system is this falling apart? Why are we not deploying frequently? We'll talk about this in a few minutes in terms of how to actually investigate something like this and figure out what capabilities are broken, what's part of the systems are broken that we should invest in. But I think the core thing to remember is do not use them as a goal. Just because your leadership team is looking at this doesn't mean you should treat this as a goal for your team. It's a way to diagnose bottlenecks in your system. And a very simple way to think about this is it that much better for your customers to ship 10 tiny commits a day versus 5 slightly bigger commits? Like, is that actually leading to a better customer outcome? My guess is probably not, but it might indicate things in your systems that are broken or could be improved, but they themselves are not the outcome that you care about. And so you don't want to use them as goals. You want to treat them as a way to diagnose system bottlenecks.
Yeah, and Ganesh, you raise a really important point here as well. Although you didn't say it explicitly, I do want to make it explicit. When we look at both throughput and stability, it's important that the team, the group of humans responsible for an application or service, all collectively share joint ownership of them. The real gaming happens when you start to split out that ownership. If you go back to, I don't know, a decade ago, we might have turned to developers and said, those throughput metrics, they're yours. Make sure we're moving fast. And then we'd turn around to our operators and say, those stability metrics, you're responsible for those. Make sure everything is stable. When you do that, we're setting up this fight against one another, right? But when we collectively own both the throughput and the stability, that really changes the equation. The other thing that happens there is if we do try to game the metrics, like to your point in this question, well, if I want to increase my deployment frequency, what's one way I can do that? I can ship smaller changes, and those smaller changes are less likely to break, which is also going to improve my stability. Oh, you just gamed the metrics and you're getting better outcomes. That's pretty awesome. But I also appreciate your point here. Does shipping 10 tiny commits a day instead of 5 lead to better customer outcomes? This reminds us, one of the other big findings from DORA is that we have to have a user-centric approach. We aren't using technology for technology's sake. We aren't shipping software because we're in the business of shipping software, and that we're in the business of serving our customers. I think that's super important.
And your point about bringing teams together and having kind of shared ownership, I think is really important, especially if you think about larger organizations where some of those responsibilities might be broken out. Like you have an SRE team, you have a developer experience team, you have a CI team, and each of those teams own something different. Sometimes their charters might look at odds, right? Like your security team might be applying, more rigor on the security side, or your SRE team is enforcing higher standards, and your developer experience team, it might seem like your developer experience team is fighting that, but actually, if you think about all those things feeding together and you take the lens of the DORA metrics, I think it helps kind of shape the narrative, because then you can say, okay, well, we want to make sure those things are balanced. We want to still move quickly. We want to ship fast, but we still need to have, our MTTR, MTTD be really good. And so now how do you get those teams working together? Well, an example of this might be, well, the developer experience team invests in tooling that automatically generates dashboards for every team and pre-configures every new service with the right monitors and SLOs. That way, your developers are getting a great developer experience. Your SRE team is able to meet their charter, and now all of a sudden, you're driving the right outcome you care about, which is the ability to manage incidents better, the ability to ship better. And so now all of your teams are kind of working together to deliver the same outcomes. And so that shared ownership mentality thing is really important that you called out.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we move on, one of the things that you called out there was, you don't improve deployment frequency by going and shouting at the team. You have to deploy more frequently. And as a team, we don't get better at deployment frequency by thinking really hard about deployment frequency. That's not the path to improvement. Instead, we need to think about the capabilities that are actually driving those particular metrics. Those capabilities, within DORA, we talk about them at sort of a category level, categories of things like a climate for learning, fast feedback, and fast flow. When we have those things in place, then we can really start to unlock the power of software delivery performance. Those categories really do touch on technical practices and cultural elements, leadership behaviors, all of this. We kind of take a holistic view of how the team is working. And one of the things that we encourage folks to do is have sort of a dispassionate view of how are these capabilities playing out on my team or within my organization. I'll give you a good example of this. One of the things that we've seen in our research is that teams with faster code reviews have about a 50% better software delivery performance. Now, that's not a surprise, but if we don't sort of look at how our systems are going, we might not realize that code reviews are a significant bottleneck for us. So with the DORA framework, we encourage you to understand first, how are you doing with software delivery performance? Then you decide you want to improve that. So let's go find a bottleneck. Where in your process are things getting stuck? Where are they getting hung up? Code reviews might be a great example of that. And already you can probably start to imagine some technical ways that you could improve the code review process, but there are certainly also cultural elements, process elements, leadership behaviors that can help improve that code review processing time. And then you can improve both the quality of your code reviews and the speed of those code reviews. Now imagine the impact that that has on your change lead time, your ability to ship code, and more importantly, ship code with confidence. All of this really matters. So it is really about thinking about, capturing those DORA metrics, those software delivery performance metrics, but the work we're going to do as a team is improving our capabilities.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, it might be worth just kind of pausing here and talking about what potentially goes into that code review part of the cycle. Like I can think of a whole bunch of things, like you mentioned, the socio-technical aspects. It could be that, you have a bottleneck in reviewers where senior engineers are the ones taking the brunt of reviews. And so maybe you need to do more knowledge sharing and have reviews be distributed more evenly. It might be a sign that people are taking longer to do reviews because they're not confident in the test suite catching issues. And so people are actually spending time doing manual QA and checking out the code or reading the code really closely. Maybe you don't have a culture of product specs that consider all the cases, and so you can cross-reference, hey, what exactly is the behavior of this change, and does it meet the specification that we had? And so there's so many things that could be involved here. Or are there other things that come to mind as like things that might be like threads I can pull out when we talk about just code reviews as what sounds like a very simple part of the process, but actually, touches on quite a few things.
Yeah, and I think that conversation that we're just now having around code reviews, like that's a great example of how to use the DORA framework, right? We understand how our software delivery performance is. We decide we want to improve it. We don't know exactly where, so we sit down, we have a conversation, we identify as code review as a place where we want to improve, and then we start thinking about, well, what are some of the ways that we could improve code review? And in fact, those software delivery performance metrics almost lead us to new metrics. Let's have some metrics around our code review process, and with those metrics, maybe we even design an experiment or a hypothesis. As a team, we could say, we believe that by improving our code review process, that's going to improve our software delivery performance, which, by the way, DORA says improves organizational performance and well-being. So let's test all of that. Now for the next quarter, sprint, whatever it is, let's focus on improvements that we want to make around our code review process. At the end of that period, we now have these baseline metrics in place that we can go back and review. That's how we build fast feedback and really start to understand What are the impacts of these changes or interventions that we're introducing into the system?
I love that you called out hypotheses testing. And if there's one takeaway from today's webinar that I want attendees to walk away with, it's the fact that, engineering metrics, it's like all the craze right now. Right? Everyone's thinking about engineering productivity metrics and, everything from, PR throughput and Jira flow metrics and things like that. But I want to call out the point of those metrics is not to measure productivity. They're a way to empower your teams to hypothesis test. Because you can't just push those individual metrics, right? You can say, I believe that by changing X, Y, and Z, we will see an impact on these two metrics, and maybe you even have a guardrail metric that like catches the negative. This is like basic product testing stuff, right? So it's like, hey, we think that by doing pair code reviews, that we're going to, improve our both our MTTR because now we have more people on our team that understand the issue, so we can, actually fix issues faster, or we might have better code review cycle times or whatnot. And so it's really a way for us to hypothesis test. And the way I think that plays out is you don't want engineering leadership who come in and says, we are going to mandate our teams improve the code review cycle time. You can say like, hey, as an engineering leader, this quarter we're going to trial these three things. We believe that this is where our processes are broken, and by adopting these practices, we want to see these metrics improve. And so you can actually get your teams to buy into engineering metrics that way. You can say, hey, we're not using engineering metrics to measure your productivity. We're trying to make your lives better. We're trying to improve the flow of your teams. And so why don't we all look at these metrics? Why don't we all see whether the things that we're changing are actually having an impact? And I think having that mindset of like, these are experiments, these are things we are trying and measuring and going back to the drawing board, that mindset is so, so important. And I think a lot of teams, especially in today's climate, are losing sight of that and treating engineering metrics as a way to measure teams versus a way to measure the output of experiments.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is so important. And you talked earlier about having previously worked in a well-regulated industry, right? Financial services. All too often, I hear teams using their industry as a crutch for why they can't improve. Oh, that can't work here. We're well-regulated. Okay, but let's try something. Let's experiment with something. And that really gets us back to those capabilities that I talked about. That capability or a climate for learning. What are some of the capabilities that fall into that? Things like quality documentation, code maintainability, autonomy for the teams, of course, with guardrails. But, a leader doesn't come in and say, you're going to cut your code review times in half, and here's how you're going to do it. They may set a goal, but you have to leave the work up to the team on the ground, the team of practitioners that's doing that work. So when we think about those capabilities, like I said, we've got a climate for learning, which includes those things that are listed there. You've got fast flow, which might be deployment automations, continuous delivery, your change approval process. Boy, in those financial services, change approvals can get really, really hairy. And our research shows that change approval process, a heavyweight change approval process specifically, slows down your throughput. Oh, but you probably already knew that. Like that's not a mind-blowing finding from our research. Oftentimes we find things that are obvious. But here's the thing that we also found with heavyweight change approval process. Not only does it slow things down, which we all knew, but we also found evidence that shows that it actually increases the instability that you have. So it makes you slower and it makes your changes less stable. So again, this is an area where as a team, you can decide to focus and go make real changes. On fast feedback, we have things like continuous integration, of course, test automation, monitoring. We want to get that feedback. Each and every one of these is a thing that as an individual or a team, you probably have the autonomy that you need and the control that you need to actually go and change things. Now, some of the things that we look at, one of our climate for learning things is the underlying culture that you have within your organization. As an individual or a single team, you might not be able to change that culture, but your leadership can help with that. So the capabilities really sort of span the level of control and the level of influence that you have as an individual, as a team, as an organization.
I think what's interesting to call out here as well is, especially in the enterprise, you may have heard people talk about these things in different ways. Like we talk about shift left, we talk about modernization of CI, we talk about release management, education. Like these are all things that we may have heard. And I think what I really like about capabilities is that they make it very clear why these things matter and how they tie back into the four keys, right? why do we talk about shifting things left? It's not just about feedback or like taking things off of one team and putting onto the other. It's about fast feedback. Like how quickly in the process can we surface information to you so that you can iterate on it, right? So it's not, you're not going back and forth with the team, you're not going back and forth with the system. The earlier in the process, the more quickly in that process you can get certain information, the more likely you are to stay in flow, the more likely you are to not have bottlenecks in the code review process or the deployment process. And so rather than talking about things like shift left or educate, you can kind of bring those things into the broader conversation of DORA. And I think that framing is really interesting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ganesh, I want to touch on another one of the pitfalls that I all too often see people falling into when it comes to these metrics. And that's a word that has popped up in this webinar lots and lots already, the word team. When we start thinking about teams, we almost immediately start start moving away from thinking about entire products, right? And that joint ownership and accountability. The truth is that each one of those metrics is not asking on your team, what is the typical time for, say, a code change to go from committed to deployed, but rather for this application, what is the time it takes for a code change to go from committed all the way through to deployed? And it is really important that we look at these metrics and think about the capabilities that we want to invest in at the product or service level. Now, across an organization, we might start to see patterns. Oh, in this organization, there are like, I don't know, maybe there are 100 different teams and maybe, I don't know, 300 different applications that we're shipping off to production. Well, across 200 of these applications, we're finding that we don't have enough test coverage, right? We aren't getting feedback fast enough. Now we can spin up maybe an improvement effort across multiple teams, but we start at that system level. That's what really is important. And having things, this slide really irks me, right? Team A deploys more than team B. Great. What does that mean to you? Does that mean that team B is working on maybe an application or service that is stable and doesn't actually require a whole lot of change? That doesn't necessarily mean team B is better or worse than team A. But what we have to do is keep these measured at the level of an application or service, because that's where we can actually drive change.
Yeah, and I think that another thing to think about is like at what level can you apply automation as well? Like for example, if I'm trying to get visibility into vulnerabilities and the process around vulnerabilities, am I operating at a team level or a system level or service level? Like what is the smallest atomic unit that I can automate and build process system about? Or if I'm debugging a process, where am I going to end that investigation? And I think to your earlier point, what if team B has a mainframe, but they're doing
Yeah.
great with the mainframe, or team A has a different tech stack, they're working on different criticality of service. Maybe they're working on internal tooling. There's so many things that could be different about those teams that it doesn't tell you anything. But the more information you can collect about your systems, I think the more interesting things you can do about that. Like where in the SDLCs, is this a internal system? Is it an external facing system? Does it have certain compliance regulations that are relevant? Like, does it have to conform to PCI DSS? Is it a payment system? Is it a different security threshold? Is it, one microservice that makes up a broader system? There's so many interesting like dimensions to this that I think can help you figure out more about your systems as well.
Yeah, and that also helps us remember that, again, we're not chasing a specific number. I'm not trying to get to 250 deploys a month. What I'm trying to do is improve how we're doing today. And so I always would prefer to celebrate the team that over the last, we'll call it 6 months, which application has improved the most over the last 6 months. That's more interesting to me than which application has deployed the most over the last 6 months. We are on this journey of continuous improvement, continuous learning. We always want to, as we say in DORA, get better at getting better.
I love that. In my role, I get asked a lot about industry benchmarks. Like, oh, I want to compare myself to my peers, and I always say like that is the last thing you should think about. Like, you should just be benchmarking yourself against yourself. Like, is
Yes.
our team better than we were last week, last month, last quarter, last year? Because that points to actual improvement. I think benchmarks are interesting. They can tell you like as a whole, are we moving in the right direction? Are there things that we should be learning? But at the most granular level, you are comparing yourself to yourself. I think that mindset is really, really important.
Yeah, and I'll take some culpability there, Ganesh. DORA publishes some industry benchmarks, and
Yeah.
frankly, I'm not sure that we should continue to do that. We probably will, but the challenge with that is exactly as you've said. People want to compare themselves to those industry benchmarks, but the only real comparisons are to the same application or service over time. Those are the ones that matter most.
The way I think about it is like the benchmarks you look at are probably different based off of where you sit in the organization. And we're just kind of spitballing here. So tell me what you think about this. I think about like individual teams should compare themselves to themselves. Like they probably shouldn't look too much at other teams as a tech lead, as a manager on one team. Looking at my own team's metrics and improving that is probably really useful. If I'm a manager of managers, I probably want to compare against a broader subset of the company that I work at. Like, how does our team compare to other teams that have similar systems? Like, it is useful for us to say, hey, what are other teams we should be learning from? And then, as an engineering leader, as a CTO or VP, I'm looking also at other companies in the industry where I'm like, hey, yes, we're trying to improve our individual teams, but are there things I should be learning from the industry that I should go and talk to other engineering leaders? Like what are people doing in the industry so that we're not left behind? So maybe the granularity of benchmarks you're looking at is different depending on where you sit in the organization for learning.
I think that's spot on. And I think there's also, again, something that you've sort of left unsaid there, and that is the culture and the mindset of how we're using these. You talked very much about, hey, this team seems to be doing better than this team. They have the same sort of tech stack and maybe even the same types of users. Like there's a lot of things that are similar. There's two different ways you can approach that as a leader. Do we go and punish one team for not doing as well? Or do we go and find ways to support that team? And that mindset and that approach that you take as a leader will tell a lot about about your organization's ability to improve over the long term. So I think that's really, really important to call out as well.
The other thing I'll mention before I move to the next slide is, especially in today's day and age, I like to think that systems and applications are the most stable unit of measurement as well. Like you constantly have reorgs, teams are changing. And so being able to kind of consistently measure at the application level kind of gives you a different kind of visibility than teams. And especially when you think about service ownership or system ownership, I think it's really important to have ownership at the service level because services are constant. Your code is constant. That may be move between teams. And so if you only measure things at the team level, your metrics might be flopping all over the place because it's actually reflective of changes in ownership of services and systems or a reorg. Like, what does it actually tell you? But if I can roll up data from a service level and then apply a team lens, that is going to give me more stability in those metrics in a way that just a team level will not as well. So I think that especially in this kind of era where you are seeing more reorgs and team shuffling around, I think it's really important to have that mindset as well.
Yeah, and with those metrics in place, you might even be able to test what was the efficacy of that past reorg. Did it actually improve things for the applications that were affected by the reorgs? I think that's another great reason why we should measure these things at the application and service level.
Absolutely. Or find issues and capabilities. Maybe you need better education because you lost knowledge in that reorg. So yeah,
Absolutely.
super important. Now I want to bring it to AI. Obviously, a lot of people here are thinking like, what does AI do to these DORA metrics? Are they still relevant? Should I be thinking about different metrics? And my answer is these metrics are actually more timeless than ever. Like you will see AI coding assistants reshape software delivery in different ways, but they will inevitably show up in your DORA metrics in different ways, right? And I think the thing I want to call out is those metrics can go either way. And I think that's a really important to think about. Let's look at, for example, you're writing more code. You have AI coding assistants that are writing a lot more code for you. Is this a good thing? Like, are your teams using this to write more tests, and so therefore your change failure rate is improving? Or do you have worse MTTR because your teams understand that code less? Are you getting better code review cycle times because you have AI assistants that are doing PR reviews for you? Or is it taking longer because now nobody understands their code, and even a process that you had before, like peer reviews, aren't working because even the author doesn't understand their own code? Like there are things that could be better, there are things that could be worse. But at the end of the day, the beauty of the four keys, the beauty of the DORA metrics are that they're indicators of your ability to deliver business outcomes. So with or without AI, they're indicators of whether you're delivering those outcomes to your customers. And so by thinking about the impact of AI on those metrics, you're actually able to apply a different lens to those investigations. So Nathan was talking about the way I might investigate a problem in our code review process, right? I think with AI, that doesn't necessarily change. The way I think about that is like, okay, what are all the steps that are involved for me going from having a commit in my local machine all the way to taking that thing to production? And what are all the things that AI could affect, right? AI could affect the ability for me writing that code. It affects the code review process for the person pushing the PR because maybe they are trying to understand their own code. Maybe the code reviewer is doing more things. Maybe your test coverage is changing. Maybe your tests are taking longer to run because you have more tests now. There's so many things, but by taking that value stream approach of saying, what are all the things that happen from the commit to a deployment, you can start saying, okay, well, let me pull on this thread. What are the things that AI is affecting? And then you apply the same kind of investigation lens, right? What are the parts of the process that are maybe slowing down or breaking or bottlenecking? And then what can we do to fix that? Is it AI changing something? Can AI help us fix that process? And so I think really applying the DORA metrics and the idea of capabilities is going to be timeless, regardless of whether you have AI adoption in your organization. Is there anything you would add to that, Nathan?
Yeah, I'll just bring in a couple of findings that we have. In 2024, we looked deep into AI, and one of the things that we saw is exactly what you've called out here. As we see teams bringing more and more AI into their software development practices, we actually saw a drop off in both speed and stability. And it's really interesting because we want to understand why. And I think, Jeff asked a question or made a comment here in the Q&A that PR reviews are a huge bottleneck where Jeff works. And his company wants to invest in AI for code crafting, but not for PR review summaries, right? For reviewers and things like that. It's interesting because, if we take that systems approach, there's always a bottleneck in the system. And frankly, with software development, the bottleneck has rarely been the speed with which we write code or the quantity of code that we create. There are other bottlenecks further downstream that really matter. And so that's what we found in 2024. Now, the 2025 report is coming out soon. It will be called the State of AI-Assisted Software Development. Now, that report isn't out yet, so I can't share anything with you about it. But Ganesh, it's just you and me here, right? So I'll share
I
some
think so.
things. I'll share some things. So look, what we're seeing in 2025 is that throughput is actually improving as you use more AI. Stability still has some challenges. It's still not improving. In fact, it gets a little bit worse with AI. We go into a lot of detail about that in the 2025 report that's coming out soon. So you didn't hear it here first. Imagine that you never heard it. This is a secret that I'm sharing only with you. But also, I love that you call out value stream investigations. We have a chapter on value stream mapping in the 2025 report. So be sure to watch out for that.
I think you touched on a really important point when it comes to measuring the impact of AI in your organization, which is that I think a lot of organizations are just thinking about measuring ROI. Like, am I getting the value? And value is very used very broadly here. I think most people tend to imply, are we shipping more stuff to our customers because of AI? And that's how they're measuring ROI. But I think what people are not measuring or thinking about as much is the impact of that on the actual software you're delivering. Like, what is the impact on reliability, on incidents, on organizational health? Like, it's not just about an ROI. My hot take is that I think in a year, most organizations will have adopted some sort of AI coding assistant. We won't be having this ROI conversation anymore because it's like, would I buy my developer an IDE or a good laptop? Probably. Should I buy them a coding assistant? Probably. But then the question is, okay, well, what is the impact of that on these metrics, on our ability, on stability, on throughput, and how do we handle that part of the process? I think is going to be really, really important. I think a lot of people are not talking about that just yet. So it sounds like
Yeah,
the report is going to bring up some of those things to the forefront of the conversation. I'm very excited for that.
I certainly hope so, because I do see a lot of organizations that are hyper focused on measuring adoption of these new AI tools. And adoption is important. It is certainly the case that you cannot get to impact if you don't have adoption, right? You don't get improvement just by purchasing an AI license. But it is also true that adoption in and of itself is not sufficient to lead to those good impacts. It's how you use the AI and where you use it throughout. So just in another
100%.
little quick preview, we have a DORA AI capabilities model coming out in the 2025 report that's going to talk about the specific capabilities that actually take AI's impact and amplify it on the outcomes that we care about. But I definitely should not have said that. So you didn't hear it here.
I love it. I can't wait to see it. I know we're almost at time here. Just want to quickly wrap up with, obviously this, I am one of the founders of Cortex. I want to talk a little bit about how Cortex can help fit in here. Cortex is an IDP. It's an internal developer portal. And the way to think about that is it's a system that enables this life cycle. How do I go from collecting data about my services and systems, producing insights, figuring out what's broken, and then driving action from that? And so the way we think about that through our products is our catalog. So starting with a service catalog where I can catalog things like all of our repositories or services or systems, the owners, all the metadata about them. Cortex is the only IDP with an engineering intelligence product and DORA dashboards baked in. So you can actually immediately start measuring that stuff within your IDP. Then you can take that and drive the changes that you want in those capabilities through scorecards and initiatives. So saying, hey, I want teams to start adopting better review process, better automation, test automation, SLO adoption, monitoring. All those things can be defined as scorecards and then driven through initiatives. Cortex uses AI to actually catalog your services. We can drive service ownership automatically. We will generate your DORA dashboard automatically. And then, like I said, the most important thing here is how do you drive continuous improvement? How do I go from, hey, I figured out what the problem is to these are the capabilities that we want to improve through scorecards and initiatives. So just a quick kind of sneak preview of what that looks like. A scorecard is the ability to define a set of standards and practices you care about. So it's not just, hey, you should deploy more, but hey, we want at least one reviewer on every PR. We want reviews to be distributed across the team. We want a latency monitor. We want an uptime monitor so that we can improve our stability. We want to make sure we're doing automated unit testing. We're fixing all of our vulnerabilities on time, driving Black Friday readiness, production readiness. All those things can be done through scorecards. And then you can measure the impact of those on your hypotheses in your engineering intelligence dashboards. So your DORA dashboards, your velocity dashboards, your throughput dashboards, being able to actually measure the impact of those scorecards on your process. And we've seen, for example, some of our customers have had over 50 to 60% reduction in their MTTR and their number of incidents by driving that through scorecards. So being able to actually drive change in your DORA metrics by investigating that, figuring out the capabilities you want to improve, driving cultural change through scorecards themselves. So to quickly summarize here the last minute, the 4 keys are leading and lagging indicators. They help you understand throughput and stability. They help you understand your organizational performance. They are not meant to be used as goals. You want to focus on capabilities. What should teams actually be doing? What do you actually want to change? But caveat that was saying, you want to measure this by systems and applications, not teams, because systems are more stable. They'll help you understand the underlying things that you can actually change. Teams are not a useful unit of measuring the stuff. AI does impact all the 4 keys, but the process of improving them stays the same. You want to focus on the capabilities. You want to investigate through the value stream. You want to figure out what you actually want to improve and drive that throughout the organization. And then finally, you want to use an IDP because it not only helps you measure DORA, but it actually helps you drive improvement in those capabilities across the organization and change the culture around it. So today I'm excited to announce that there is a new Academy course in Cortex for if you're a customer. There's a new scorecard that will be going out that you can adopt to actually measure some of these changes in your organization. And there's an Academy if you want to learn offline, share with your team about how to actually think about DORA, all the takeaways from today's conversation. So excited to announce this as well. Nathen, thank you so much for joining me on this webinar. I love this conversation, lots of interesting takeaways. I hope the attendees took something away from this as well. I know I definitely did, and we're really honored to have you on the webinar today.
Thank you so much. It's been super fun. I love having these conversations and hope to continue them online with everyone that's here.
Absolutely. We'll follow up with the attendees on the webinar details, the course, and the scorecard as well. So keep an eye out for that. All right. Thank you so much. Hope to do this again soon.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.